Chapter 1266, The Position of the Lord of Heaven. Mountains overlapped a distance away, and the green color gave one an extremely refreshing feeling. However, when the people of the Sun family and the Song family recalled the battle last night, the good feeling they felt immediately vanished. Song Changjing looked at Zhao Shuai. In the past, Zhao Shuai was always very courteous when speaking to the master. The Song family also knew that Zhao Shuai had helped the Song family for almost 200 years only because he was repaying a favor. However, after the event last night, Zhao Shuai seemed to have changed, but not entirely. Song Changjing laughed. New wealthy family? Don't say this too early. It's not early. Zhao Shuai shook his head. 12 out of the 14 wealthy families decided to fight the Weiwu army. But I heard that nobody could escape unscathed after offending him, including Duanmu Huangqi. Song Changjing felt suffocated. That was right. If Duanmu Huangqi was being threatened, what about the wealthy families of the palace? Meanwhile, Zhao Shuai and Xiao Mingze from the palace had begun investing in Lushu a long time ago. Song Changjing suddenly recalled the incident that happened in the Song family a while ago. The magical armor that Xiao Mingze gave Lu Shu came from the warehouse of the Song family. That was something that was kept deep within the warehouse. However, the Song family had been a wealthy family for a long time. The members were too busy enjoying themselves to realize that the warehouse even stored those types of armor. However, it was impossible to keep secrets. On the 9th day Lu Shu left the palace, the news that Xiao Mingze had gifted the magical weapons were exposed. Xiao Mingze was punished by the master of the Song family to kneel in the yard for a long time. The master of the Song family asked Xiao Mingze for his reason for doing it and he answered, it was a rare commodity worth investing in. From that day on, not only did Xiao Mingze stay alive, he was protected by the master of the Song family. Meanwhile, the worker that reported that Xiao Mingze used the magical weapon was killed by the master. Apart from that, every single worker that knew about this was killed. Zhao Shuai and Xiao Mingze became the chief officer and boss respectively. However, they knew that they would have died if they did not escape unscathed. After all, the people who dealt with the wealthy families were still workers. In fact, before he left the palace, Zhao Shuai had already promised Xiao Mingze that he would leave the Song family. Now, Song Changjing felt that the master's decision was very wise. Only those who dealt personally with the Weiwu army would know that the wealthy families were extremely helpless in the safe and peaceful universe. Meanwhile, the Weiwu army were like the wolves who ate the helpless sheep. At this moment, loud footsteps were heard from a distance away. Song Changjing looked towards the direction nervously. He knew who had arrived, and that person was powerful enough to kill everyone. The Imperial Dragon soldiers appeared and Zhao Shuai went forward to welcome them. Song Changjing suddenly felt that Zhao Shuai's expression looked like the expression he had when he first arrived in the Song family over 100 years ago. The people from the Sun family also rushed over. When Song Changjing saw the thick armor that the other party was wearing, he was unable to tell the identity of the person. The three parties met. Zhao Shuai greeted Lu Shu, who was standing in front of the Imperial Dragon soldiers. How are you, great lord? Lu Shu smiled and Lu Xiaoyu, who was beside him, took out an armor that shook mountains from the invisible storage equipment and said calmly, will you wear it? Make a choice. We will make you wealthy after the battle. Thank you, great lord. Zhao Shuai was extremely happy. In the future palace, he would definitely be able to stand out. Song Changjing was in a daze. He did not expect Zhao Shuai to leave the Song family so suddenly. He also did not expect the Weiwu army to view the palace as their possession. After settling the problem with Zhao Shuai, Lu Shu looked at the commander of the Sun family and said while examining his armor, why are you here, master of the Sun family? Song Changjing looked over in shock. Sun Xuanwen led his troops and came over. Wasn't he guarding the tomb of his ancestors? He had only been there for 7 days. According to the customs, he had to stay there for at least 3 years. Sun Xuanwen took off his armor and said while smiling, "Great Lord, you have great observation skills. You managed to recognize me despite my armor. Nobody expected this to happen." The masters of the other wealthy families would always send people with important positions over instead of going over personally. After all, if any mishaps happened, they were doomed. However, as the master of the Sun family, Sun Xuanwen came over and took the risk by himself. Lu Shu smiled. "You are rather daring to come here by yourself? Did you gain the courage from advancing to the Master Realm?" "The Master Realm is not the reason. I don't think it's difficult for you to kill a master." "I came because I think that you won't kill me," smiled Sun Xuanwen. "I am only able to show my sincerity if I came personally. I risk my life for you. If you want to kill me, I won't resist." This was an eye-opening day for Song Changjing. Firstly, the master of the Sun family risked his life. Now, that master let down his guard in front of Lu Shu and told Lu Shu that he could kill him. At this moment, Song Changjing realized that the people wearing black armor behind Lu Shu had their arms hidden in their armor, as though they were hiding some important weapons that could kill even a master. Suddenly, Sun Xuanwen asked, "May I ask if my son is still alive?" Lu Shu smiled. He had heard that Sun Xuanwen doted on his son extremely. He did not believe that initially, as he thought that power and status overpowered love in the wealthy families. However, it seemed like Sun Xuanwen cared a lot about family ties. Lu Shu said, "He is all right. However, I found out that his literacy standard is quite low, hence I am giving him supplementary lessons." Sun Xuanwen laughed. It is his honor to receive supplementary lessons from the Great Lord. After knowing that Sun Zhongyang was all right, Sun Xuanwen heaved a sigh of relief. Then, Lu Shu asked, "You took such a big gamble. You must want something from me? What is it?" Song Changjing listened attentively. He wanted to know what Sun Xuanwen wanted. At this moment, Song Changjing did not dare to interrupt and listened attentively. Sun Xuanwen calmed down. "I came over to ask for the position of the Lord of Heaven." Lu Shu was stunned. "Why did you look for me if you want to be a Lord of Heaven?" Then, Sun Xuanwen fell to his knees and kowtowed to Lu Shu. He took a deep breath before saying, "That is because you are the Lord of Heaven. I, Sun Xuanwen, welcome your arrival." Chapter 1267, Take a Gamble. Sun Xuanwen's greeting was unexpected by everyone. Song Changjing, who was unaware of everything, might be confused, but even Lu Shu, who was aware, was extremely confused. Lu Shu asked, "Do you know what you are saying?" He did not understand how Sun Xuanwen figured out the truth. "I remember Sir Zhang Weiyu. I have recognized Sir Zhang since the spy from my Sun family sent his drawing to the family," said Sun Xuanwen. "We have especially sent the painter to Nanning City to question the relatives of the Weiwu army. I did not expect to take advantage of that." Sun Xuanwen admitted that he had known Lu Shu's identity beforehand so as to stop Lu Shu's suspicion. That was because Sun Xuanwen's attitude was too determined and it might not be good. His logic was similar to Lu Yizhao's. Would Zhang Weiyu be loyal to anyone else other than the King of Gods? After all, was Zhang Weiyu's presence in the Weiwu army not enough evidence? In fact, Zhang Weiyu had not thought about it as thoroughly as Sun Xuanwen. At this moment, Song Changjing was the most confused. When he heard Zhang Weiyu's name, he thought it sounded familiar. After 2 seconds, he knew who Sun Xuanwen was referring to. As the commander of the Imperial Palace soldiers, Zhang Weiyu had heard of every disciple. Moreover, the event that took place 23 years ago had shaken the entire palace. Song Changjing was not foolish. The only reason he did not manage to react immediately was because of the long lapse in time. Yet now, he acted as though he had become aware of a huge surprising secret. A sense of fear spread in his body and went deep into his bones. The practitioners behind him stayed more than 100 meters away, similar to the Sun family. Nobody else knew about the secret. Song Changing suddenly felt that the world had changed. The person who ruled for 3,000 years in the Luniverse had returned. He did not die. However, at this moment, he realized that Lu Shu might not allow him to survive since he now knew the secret. At this moment, Song Changing turned and ran. After a few steps, he realized that he was too slow and decided to fly. However, before he could do that, Sun Xuanwen blocked him. Sun Xuanwen slapped down on Song Changing and it felt as heavy as a mountain. He spat out a tiny turtle shell from his mouth. The turtle shell had always been hidden below his tongue as a treasure to save his life. The turtle shell expanded instantly after it left his mouth. However, Sun Xuanwen's hand slammed on the turtle shell without a pause. Song Changing saw the turtle shell break apart with his own eyes. Time seemed to have stopped as Sun Xuanwen's slender palm passed through the pieces and hit Song Changing's head. With a slap, Song Changing collapsed to the ground. Although the practitioners of the Song family saw everything, it happened so quickly that they did not have the time to save Song Changing. Moreover, at this moment, they were only thinking about fleeing. With a boom, the ground that the Song family troops were standing on began to collapse. The soil sank into the ground like a waterfall, causing the practitioners who wanted to escape to fall in. When Sun Xuanwen saw this, he narrowed his eyes. He did not know who the person attacking was or where the master was hiding. How did he manage to master the Earth-type metahuman skills like that? Had he been practicing it for his entire life? Sun Xuanwen sucked up to Lu Shu because he thought Lu Shu was powerful enough. Sun Xuanwen might look loyal, but he had already guessed Lu Shu's identity before the bloody battle on the limestone bricks. However, why didn't he attack at that time? He thought Lu Shu would die. Eventually, he regretted it and decided to close his doors as he thought that he was blinded by status. However, after he opened his doors, Sun Xuanwen was not more loyal but instead, he became more charismatic and was no longer fearful. After all, as a wealthy family, he still cared about benefits. Now, Sun Xuanwen was more certain that his choice was correct. 14 families from the wealthy families of the palace came over and only the Sun family was left. The contact between the Song family and the Imperial Dragon soldiers was Zhao Shuai and Xiao Mingzi. Now that both of them had decided to leave, Lu Shu no longer felt anything for the Song family. Lu Shu asked Zhao Shuai, "Is Xiao Mingzi safe?" Zhao Shuai nodded. "Before I left the palace, I helped him seek refuge. The Song family won't be able to find him." "That's good." Lu Shu nodded and turned to look at Sun Xuanwen. "If you want the position of the West Lord of Heaven, go ahead and fight for it by yourself. As for how you will perform, I will wait and see." Sun Xuanwen put his hands together and said, "Rest assured, Lord." After he said that, Lu Shu turned and led the Imperial Dragon soldiers towards the west region. Sun Xuanwen, on the other hand, led the Sun family and followed closely behind. The 10,000 elites he brought with him were loyal soldiers who were willing to sacrifice themselves for the position of the West Lord of Heaven. When they left, Zhang Weiyu whispered to Lu Shu, "This brat is very sly. He must love his son a lot because he asked about his son after he came. This means that his son is his weakness, and his weakness is in your control. This is the best way to gain his trust." Lu Shu smiled and waved his hands. "We don't have to force everyone to be loyal. I don't intend to continue taking up the role of the King of Gods after the battle." Zhang Weiyu was stunned. He asked, "Do you really dare to give up on the role?" "Why not?" smiled Lu Shu. "Isn't the local cuisine good and the mobile games fun? Why must I be the King of Gods?" Zhang Weiyu was happy. "I will follow you anywhere you go." However, at this moment, the low sound of a horn was heard in the west region. That sound made one very uncomfortable. Zhang Weiyu frowned. "I wonder what this means." "What do we do, Great Lord?" Li Haitan interrupted, "Great Lord, let's charge in and kill all of them." To Li Haitan, everything could be settled by being rash and strategy was unnecessary. Lu Shu shook his head. We should be careful as we are not sure what the situation is. Li Haitan was extremely happy when he heard that. He turned and shouted to the Imperial Dragon soldiers, brothers, did you hear that? Great Lord said we can risk it and fight. Lu Shu was speechless. Hold on. Lu Shu stopped Li Haitan immediately. With your literacy level, you are still not planning to do your homework? Li Haitan suddenly felt very wronged. He did not know what mistake he had made. However, before he could ask about it, Duanmu Huangqi's voice echoed through the sky. The gates of the city have opened. Duanmu Huangqi is waiting for the Great Lord at the palace in the west region. Nobody expected Duanmu Huangqi to open the city gates at this moment. Moreover, he was still waiting for Lu Shu's arrival. However, Duanmu Huangqi had not expected to wait for half a month. From Duanmu Huangqi's distress, plus 666. Chapter 1268, Seal the City. If Lu Shu was alone, he could definitely be reckless. Although he was cautious, he had been reckless a few times in Africa and in Europe. But during a war, it was different. He was entrusted with the lives of many and every decision was very important. Thus, if he would not return, then he would not go. The city gates of the West capital had been opened. For the first few days, no one came out, and no one went in. The Imperial Dragon soldiers and the Sun family had pitched their campsite dozens of kilometers away. Outsiders did not know what the Imperial Dragon soldiers were doing. Not even the elites from the Sun family beside them knew what Lu Shu was planning. But Sun Xuanwen did not panic. Since he had made his move, all he had to do was wait. When the Sun family cut off communication with the wealthy families from the palace, the wealthy families started to panic. For a period of time, the practitioners who were scattered about doing business started to gather near the palace. Even if they lost their business, they had to protect their families. After a long period of peace, the wealthy families from the palace finally understood that in this world, their fists were their last weapons when they encountered danger. It was not systems or rules. When systems and rules were established, they were created to deceive the peasants in this slave society and build a hierarchy of dominance. But as time passed, and the wealthy families in the palace experienced a change in authority, the later generations gradually forgot how their ancestors had established their footing in the palace. At this moment, the people of the Luniverse suddenly realized that even if Lu Shu did not move, everyone else was deploying manpower in preparation for a battle. It was as if Lu Shu was the eye of the storm and outside the peaceful eye of the storm was a terrifying hurricane. Lu Shu could no longer see distress points from Duanmu Huangqi. It was not that he was calm. Lu Shu was earning distress points from too many people. He could not find the distress points from Duanmu Huangqi. At this moment, Lu Shu conscientiously counted the number of distress points he needed to advance. He could not be blamed for desperately grabbing distress points during the entire journey. The gap was just too large. He now needed 100 million distress points to light the first star of the 6th level of Nebula. It was the same for the second star. The third star required 200 million distress points, and when it came to the 7th star, he needed 3.2 billion distress points. This meant that he needed 6.4 billion distress points in total for the 6th level of Nebula. Lu Shu felt that he had killed enough people. He had killed a total of 300,000 soldiers during his time in the Luniverse. This time, he had killed several thousand slave owners and 130,000 elites from the palace. Even if this was the case, there would only be a total of 500 million distress points, with each person contributing 1,000 points. It was a far cry from the 6.4 billion points that he needed. No wonder the old King of Gods had gone on a massacre for several years. Back then, the population of the Luniverse was much higher. Lu Shu had seen records of these events in the Sword Hut, and according to the records, there were several million practitioners in the Luniverse. he could not have killed all of them, right? Of course, Lu Shu did not just have 500 million distress points. He was about to finish lighting up the entire 5th level of Nebula. At this moment, Lu Shu suddenly realized that the biggest source of distress points was public fear. Every time they attacked a city, the civilians in the city would panic. Although the civilians slowly understood that Lu Shu and the others would not kill them, when they saw the city walls collapse, how could they not be distressed? It was normal. Furthermore, he often deployed Zhang Weiyu and the rest to go into the cities and tell scary stories about the Imperial Dragon soldiers. This forcibly created fear. Lu Shu had given up on the distress points from Earth. Now, he was world hero Lu Xiaoshu. But the civilians in the Luniverse had become Lu Shu's foundation. Although each person did not produce many distress points, there were many people. The productivity in the Luniverse was lower than on Earth. This caused the population density to be lower than on Earth as well. But no matter what, Lu Shu had to confess that although killing people was the most direct method, continuing development was the way to go. If he did not know that he was the old king of gods in his previous life, he would have mocked the old king of gods for his low level of education. He did not know how to make long-term developments, and all he did was fight and kill. This would not do. Although Lu Shu did not want to admit this, but he had to face reality. The old king of gods' level of education was truly very poor. Now, the celestial map would provide a large amount of distress points every day. But he still had 4.8 billion distress points left to earn. He had no choice but to increase their workload. As the largest city in the West region, the West capital had many civilians. At first, although the city gates were open, they did not dare to run away from the city. After all, the West region was their home and the Imperial Dragon soldiers were the intruders. Civilians were like this, and as long as they were able to survive, they would not think of rebelling. Furthermore, they had been locked up in the city and did not know what was happening outside. Thus, they always felt that there was no problem with Duanmu Huangqi protecting the West capital. After all, he was a lord of heaven. But recently, they felt that something was wrong. The wealthy families in the palace had businesses in the West capital. Thus, they had messenger mirrors. The wealthy families in the West capital all knew what was happening, and in less than one day, the news spread throughout the capital. Some civilians wanted to escape when the city gates were opened. They saw that a war was about to break out. Some aristocrats in the capital used their slaves to test it out. Before they could go out of the city, soil mixed with gravel suddenly rose from the ground. Duanmu Huangqi had opened the city gates, but Lu Xiaoyu had blocked the gates. Everyone in the city was dumbfounded. What was happening? On one hand, the city gates had been opened wide, allowing their enemies the chance to enter. On the other hand, the attackers did not go through the door, they even sealed it up. What kind of game were they playing? The Imperial Dragon soldiers did not do so to cut off their food supply. During an era with no practitioners, this method might be effective. But the cultivation civilization had advanced to its current level. Sealing the city was not enough to secure victory. Of course, Lu Shu was not foolish. He did not just want to kill his way to victory. He wanted the distress points from the city. If Lu Shu could be cruel, it would be faster for him to kill all the civilians. But the problem was that he was not willing to do so. At that moment, the Imperial Dragon soldiers sealed the city from the outside. The civilians in the city panicked. They did not know what the Imperial Dragon soldiers was doing. Suddenly, Li Haitan asked, "Great Lord, is this part of your plan?" Lu Shu was dumbfounded. What's wrong with my plan? What's wrong with this small plan? Go and do your homework. Li Haitan felt as if he had been treated unjustly. Did I say something wrong? Chapter 1269, Master Lu Xiaoyu. Chen Zuan saw that Li Haitan wanted to talk back, and so he pulled Li Haitan aside. Brother, there are some things you can only say once a day. Once you go over that limit, accidents happen easily. Back then, you did not buy any insurance when you were on Earth. Even if you did, it happened in the universe and they will not compensate you. Li Haitan thought about it. After all, Chen Zuan was his senior. There were some things he had to listen to from more experienced people. Li Haitan scratched his head. I don't want to anger the Great Lord either. I'm just bad at speaking. Chen Zuan winked. No worries. Let me tell you. Brother Shu will not actually get angry. As long as you make good use of your daily cool-down period, nothing will happen. Li Haitan was dumbfounded. His senior truly had experience. Li Haitan, don't listen to his nonsense. Cheng Qiuqiao pushed Chen Zuan aside. He said to Li Haitan, you are different from him. You are frank. He simply is looking for death. What are you talking about? Chen Zuan was unhappy. I am doing so to enrich everyone's free time. Do you know the price to pay for doing so? I do. Cheng Qiuqiao calmly said, divergence, right? Chen Zuan's expression changed. Cheng Qiuqiao, if you leak that, there will be no end to our conflict. At that moment, Sun Xuanwen suddenly came to the Imperial Dragon soldiers, as if he had an important piece of news. Chen Zuan did not care about Cheng Qiuqiao and Li Haitan anymore. He hurried over to see what was happening. After Chen Zuan left, Cheng Qiuqiao said to Li Haitan, most importantly, you have to increase your EQ. But developing speaking skills will require long periods of training. Let me teach you something. If you have nothing to do, don't casually talk about Brother Shu. If other people are with you, learn from how they speak. Li Haitan nodded his head. Okay. I got it. Lu Shu shouted to the rest of the campsite, Imperial Dragon soldiers, gather. Sun Xuanwen listened by the side. Lu Shu did reuse the name of the Imperial Dragon soldiers. The Imperial Dragon soldiers had reappeared. The Imperial Dragon soldiers gathered in front of Lu Shu as quickly as possible. They did not know why they suddenly had to gather, but Lu Shu's orders were never wrong. Sun Xuanwen had come to deliver a very important piece of news. Spies from the Sun family in the West capital had said through the messenger mirror that Duanmu Huangqi's servants had started to kill people in the capital. Although Sun Xuanwen did not understand why Duanmu Huangqi would do so, he felt that there was a need to tell Lu Shu. Lu Shu was very uncomfortable. It was a good plan, but he did not expect Duanmu Huangqi to know that he could use fear to grow stronger. He had also guessed that Lu Shu had sealed the city to drag out the time and wait for his advancement. Thus, the cruel Duanmu Huangqi decided to kill even his own civilians, in order to prevent Lu Shu from having the chance to advance. How cruel! How vicious! Since this was the case, let us begin the war. Of course, Sun Xuanwen and the rest did not need to be ordered by Lu Shu. They were smart. Since they wanted the position of the West Lord of Heaven, they would have to kill Duanmu Huangqi first. For this reason, Sun Xuanwen was not afraid to sacrifice 10,000 elites from the Sun family. When they eliminated the Song family, Sun Xuanwen killed Song Changjing, but this was not enough. Lu Shu knew this and Sun Xuanwen was well aware as well. The Imperial Dragon soldiers were solemn and quiet. Everyone knew that a great war was about to occur. At this moment, Lu Shu looked at the Imperial Dragon soldiers and said, "Does anyone regret this?" Li Liang saluted. "Although we have a 90% chance of dying, I have never regretted this." Zhang Weiyu took a deep breath and said, "I am willing to go through fire and water. I will not hesitate in any circumstances." Li Haitan stood beside Zhang Weiyu and was dumbfounded. What were these beautiful words? He remembered what Cheng Qiuqiao had said. He should learn from how others spoke. Thus, Li Haitan saluted. The emperor passed on before he could build his empire. Today, Zhang Weiyu was speechless. Chen Zuan was speechless. Chang Qiuqiao was speechless. Lu Shu took a deep breath. Are you showing off that you have learned a lot? Are you showing off that you have memorized the textbook? Lu Shu looked at the Imperial Dragon soldiers. He was melancholic. The depressing atmosphere was gone. Li Haitan looked meekly at him, and this time, he did not fight back. He knew that he had gone off track. He looked up and said in a soft voice, "Great Lord, I know that I am slightly dumb. I often say the wrong things and make you angry. You have taught this bandit to train and brought me to eat good food. I cannot speak well like them, but since the Azure Dragon Village was established, I have decided to follow you, Great Lord. I am willing to sacrifice my life." Lu Shu suddenly smiled. Who said that you are dumb? You are not dumb at all. He looked at the Imperial Dragon soldiers and said, "Don't sacrifice yourselves. We need all of you." Then, Lu Shu looked at Li Liang. You have the authority to command them. This time, I will destroy the city wall. Afterwards, Lu Shu led Lu Xiaoyu and Coral to fly to the west. In an instant, they disappeared from their field of vision. Li Liang smiled. Brothers, let's go. Did you hear what the Great Lord said? All of you are needed. Which king would break through enemy lines by himself? The masters of the wealthy families only dared to hide in the palace. They thought that they were too important to sacrifice themselves for the masses or even risk their lives. Li Liang looked at the new king of gods in the distance, who constantly said that he did not want to be king. Whether he was king or not was not important. Li Liang was not like Sun Xuanwen, he did not prioritize benefits. Thus, even if Lu Shu was not the king, he was willing to follow him through the most dangerous places. Sun Xuanwen saw the Imperial Dragon soldiers pull down their helmets in unison. Shortly after, Li Liang shouted, "Charge!" When the Imperial Dragon soldiers started to run for the walls, it was as if 5,000 wild beasts were unleashed. Sun Xuanwen knew that he could no longer wait. The Sun family had to immediately make their move, and they had to prove that they had value too. Lu Shu flew at a high speed, and while he flew, he took out a black abyss fruit from the celestial map. This fruit was an accumulation of all the distress points Lu Xiaoyu had earned recently. The order to attack the cities had been issued by Lu Xiaoyu. Launching a massacre on the elites using the sand-showered Tripitaka from the palace had earned her thousands of points. While Lu Shu was struggling at the 6th level of Nebula, Lu Xiaoyu had already accumulated enough distress points for the 5th level of Nebula. Lu Shu, Lu Xiaoyu, and Coral had discussed how they would break through. Thus, he had been leaving this abyss fruit until today. He was waiting for a heavenly punishment. The moment Lu Shu ate the fruit, everyone saw the lightning clouds in the sky start to gather. To Sun Xuanwen's shock, he realized that Lu Shu was planning to use the heavenly punishment to break through. This trump card was far too good. In the past, very few people could do so. On one hand, there were very few masters. On the other hand, no one could control the timing they would receive the heavenly punishment. Sun Xuanwen was puzzled. How could Lu Shu ensure that a heavenly punishment would occur now? How was controlling this? How many masters did Lu Shu have? But Sun Xuanwen had another question. What if the lightning attacked his own comrades? The heavenly punishment was heartless. Of course, he did not know that Lu Shu had someone who could control lightning. This was the final part of his trump card. Chapter 1270, Blood of Masters. In the lofty West capital, Duanmu Huangqi's servants had started to kill the civilians. Lu Shu felt that any rational person would not do so. At this moment, the entire West capital suddenly fell silent. Some people had seen the lightning clouds that gathered in the sky. Some people had also heard the thunderous footsteps of the Imperial Dragon soldiers when they ran over in their armor. The lightning clouds were different from ordinary dark clouds. Typical dark clouds were not this scary, no matter how strong the storm was. It looked as if there were a vortex in the sky and the lightning hid within the massive vortex. The lightning clouds followed wherever the person who would receive the punishment went. Thus, when Lu Shu led Lu Xiaoyu and Coral to fly to the west capital, the frightening clouds followed behind at high speeds. The sound was terrifying. There were times when the heavenly punishment could not be seen in the Luniverse for 100 years. Even if they received the heavenly punishment, they would often run to the mountains, like Sun Xuanwen. There were no masters who deliberately tricked people. Furthermore, there were no methods to save videos in the Luniverse. Typical civilians might have lived their entire lives not knowing what the heavenly punishment looked like. This was precisely the reason why some masters would invite people to watch their heavenly punishment. These people were those who had the potential or the ambition to advance to the master realm. They needed to pay the master receiving the heavenly punishment a favor. Then, they would observe what the heavenly punishment was all about. The process of heavenly punishment was the process where masters created their own rules. The observers would often benefit greatly from watching. If Sun Zhongyang's heavenly punishment had not been hasty that night, he would definitely have wanted his son to observe. It was such a pity. Before Lu Shu appeared, the heavenly punishment was a grand occasion. Now, since Lu Shu appeared, the heavenly punishment became a weapon. Who would have thought that someone would use lightning to break through a city? Anthony brought a large volume of deep-sea white sand and traveled underground. The deep-sea white sand that Sakurai Yako and Shi Shuajin had given him surrounded Anthony. This made Anthony seem like a killer whale in the ocean. To master Earth-type metahumans, the ground was the sea. When Anthony arrived under the city, the Imperial Palace soldiers did not need to use Anthony to break through the city, as Lu Shu felt that if they were going to play, they would make it big. In an instant, the deep-sea white sand split into individual grains and embedded themselves in the city wall. All the grains of the deep-sea white sand were like fulcrums for Anthony to exert power on. Using the deep-sea white sand as the center, the city wall rapidly started to disintegrate. The vast west capital collapsed like a sandcastle that a child had built on a beach. This scene was very shocking. The civilians and Duanmu Huangqi's servants in the west capital were all dumbfounded. The city wall had been built a very long time ago. Now, it had been destroyed just like that? In reality, if Anthony had not refined the deep-sea white sand, this would not have been possible. But Lu Xiaoyu was very lucky. For Lu Shu, the process of training was like obtaining what belonged to him one by one. It was like this for the gourd, filth removal, the armor that shook mountains, and the seal of lands. Only Lu Xiaoyu was very lucky. She had obtained all the deep-sea white sand that existed in this world. The deep-sea white sand was like a treasure in the ocean that had been forgotten. The city wall came crashing down like a wave. The guards on the city wall were all buried underneath the remains. The thousands of servants under Duanmu Huangqi hurriedly gathered in the north. They wanted to slow down the Imperial Dragon soldiers. Needless to say, the army of servants had to win against the Black Feather army. It was as if Duanmu Huangqi had built this army to defend against the Imperial Dragon soldiers. Many elites from the Black Feather army had been transferred to the army of servants. They were called the Jianghu camp. It was public knowledge that disciples of the Sword Hut had to join an army and train. In the past, many disciples had come to the Jianghu camp. It was only recently that all the disciples were called back. Lu Shu thought about it. Had Jiang Shuyi predicted that a war would break out? Thus, she had called back all the Sword Hut disciples to prevent any accidental injuries. Although Jiang Shuyi had never told Lu Shu about this, Lu Shu felt that this was not impossible. Although Lu Shu was not sure of the Sword Hut's position, he felt that the Sword Hut was the least likely to oppose him in the Luniverse. No matter whether it was his previous or current life, it was the same. The heavenly punishment was looming over the West capital. All the civilians wanted to go indoors in fear. It was as if going indoors would allow them to avoid the lightning. But they did not know that if the lightning was allowed to fall, most of the people in the West capital would not be able to survive. Even if they hid now, it would be of no use. The Jianghu camp created a wall in the north of the West capital. They put their black shields up. Swords poked out of the gap in between the shields. It was like a forest of swords. In the past, the imperial palace soldiers would not have dared to charge at this formation, even with the armor that shook mountains on. Sharp weapons could damage the armor that shook mountains. But now, Zhang Weiyu and the others did not seem to intend to slow down. The massive black armor ran through the city. The magical armor was like a wave surging through the street. The red tassels on the helmets of the imperial dragon soldiers were like fish swimming against the current. The next moment, 7 broken pieces flew out from their waists. But Zhang Weiyu and the rest did not combine the 7 pieces of the world tide into one. Instead, they used the broken pieces to accurately pass through the gaps between the shields, like rain dripping on rocks. They broke the sturdy rocks from within. The forest of swords panicked. The armor that shook mountains had also arrived. Over 50 imperial palace soldiers with the armor that shook mountains slammed into the wall. It was as if they were playing bowling. The defensive wall started to break apart. The collision force between the armor that shook mountains and the wall was absorbed by the orange sign in their black armor. Then, in an instant, the energy was released, forming dense hexagons in front of Zhang Weiyu and the others. The forest of swords, which seemed to be impossible to break through, was destroyed just like that. This was the reason why Duanmu Huangqi decided to leave the earth when he saw the armor that shook mountains. The practitioners fell to the ground and for some of them, their skeleton broke into pieces. Those who were lucky crawled on the ground and vomited blood. The collision had caused their organs to shift into abnormal positions. Even their vital channels had been shifted. If they forcibly used the spirit chi in their bodies to fight, their vital channels might break and their foundation would dry up as well. But the Jianghu camp seemed to be prepared. The practitioners who had been taken down did not fight back. Suddenly, people attacked from within the crowd as fine silver needles flew out from their sleeves. There seemed to be a very detailed sign on each silver needle and each needle was as thin as a hair. This was the master serving Duanmu Huangqi. There were only 3 masters left in the west region, including Duanmu Huangqi, but he had hidden a master within this formation. This proved how afraid he was of the armor that shook mountains. The expressions of Zhang Weiyu and the others were hidden under their helmets. No one knew what expressions they were making. But when they realized that a master was lying in ambush, they did not retreat. Instead, they advanced. Ouyang Lisheng had said that to unsheath the world tide, the blood of a master was needed.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show. Try to look to the heavens.